and I'm sure other people will join us. Welcome, everybody. My name is Mina Jane. I am one of the programming librarians at the Cary Library. Very happy to be here for this special program. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know that we always like to thank our library foundation, the Cary Library Foundation, for helping us bring wonderful programs like this to the Cary Library and to Lexington. I would also like to thank the Lexington Human Services. Katharine spoke with them last week and is speaking with us today. And so we were really glad to have that collaboration to do two programs with you. So I'm going to do a quick introduction of Carol. Carol just came into the meeting. Sorry about that. For Katharine, and then we'll get started, and she will get started. Katharine Esty is a social psychologist, a practicing psychotherapist, an activist for aging well, and an expert on family dynamics. Her latest self-help book is 80-Somethings, a practical guide to letting go, aging well, and finding unexpected happiness. 80-Somethings changes our understanding of old age with an upbeat, emotionally savvy view of the uncharted territory of the last stage of life. So welcome, Katharine. I'm so happy to have you here.
Well, thank you, Mina. And I'm very happy to be here. I think of Lexington as my closest town because I live in Concord and actually have a son and daughter-in-law living there and two kids in the school system. So I'm delighted to be with you all and to talk about to you as aging children, about aging parents and you as adult children. And today we're going to be talking about the title of my talk is Avoiding the Minefields of Upside Down Parenting. And I'm going to start by saying our ties to our parents are among the deepest attachments that we'll ever have in our life. For most people, the bonds are almost unbreakable. And yet, as parents age, adult children and their parents, their relationships go through some crises, some stresses and strains. And that is almost a given that there will be these challenges. And so I'm going to talk to you about what I've learned from interviewing my own research and interviewing over 128 people in their 80s and many of their children too, about looking at how they view their parents and how these relationships work out and how they work out well. So next slide, Mina. Here is what Mina introduced me to you all. And what you can see from what she said is I'm still working, which is interesting. I am a practicing psychotherapist. And I was trained as a social psychologist. So that means I'm interested both in the individual level and I'm also interested in looking at, as a social psychologist, at the kind of organizational and societal issues as well. And you can see, she says, I am a mother of 4 sons, which is true. And I'm, of course, have good credentials as an aging parent. And just in the spirit of full disclosure and open discussion, I'm 86 years old. So that gives me good credentials to be speaking for the aging parents. And I have learned a lot about from the adult children's point of view, from my children, my daughters-in-law, and the 128 people that I interviewed. So, but first of all, as we talk about this talk, we really need to, the talk I said was a talk about upside down parenting and avoiding the minefields. Well, the upside down parenting is when the parents start to give up some of their roles and the adult children start to pick them up. So let's take a look at what traditional parent-child relationship is like. Next slide, please. So the traditional parent-child relationship, if we sort of think about it from a sociological point of view, what is it that parents do? What is the role of a parent? What is the role of a child? And we all know that children come into this world totally unable to take care of themselves, totally dependent on whatever parents they are given. But as children become a little older, the role of the parents overall are to protect the children, set the household structures, make whatever rules the household has, and to make decisions for their children. But over the years, parents gradually give the children more authority, more control over their own lives. And you can see it's a move from dependence to independence. And this is what we, in our society, we prize independence. We work towards helping our children become independent. And we are proud when they are able to leave home and go out into the world. And in America, leaving home is the usual marker of independence. And it used to happen when people went off to college or when they were 18, they might leave home. Sometimes it's when they get married. And even now we find that marker is getting muddied as many children in hard times come back home. So they've left home, but they might return. And then, of course, we'll see as aging parents age, sometimes they come home too. So. And then we'll go on from here to the next slide, please. And this really explains what is upside down parenting compared to traditional parenting, where children play the children role and the adults, the parents are the parents with setting the guidelines. When we get to aging parents who are aging into their 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, the role of their children, the adult children, shifts gradually as their parents age and become more and more dependent. The adult children take on many of the roles their parents used to do. And parents, we sometimes see enter what we call get more fragile, more dependent. We talk about second childhood, and so that the roles are switched. And I call that upside down parenting. Because at the end of the life cycle with the aging parent, the adult children are often making most of the major decisions for their aging parent. So you can all think of yourselves as somewhere along a continuum of change from the parents being the parents to gradually towards the end of life, the children take on more and more responsibilities. Okay. Next slide. So let's look at the process of this reversal from the usual traditional parenting to this upside down parenting. What do we see? How do we, as real people with real families, what do we see and what happens to us? How do we know this is happening? Well, I think the first thing the adult children see is that their parents become have more and more needs. They call in for help. They say, come help me set up this computer. I don't understand how to do it. They may have trouble with their finances and ask for advice. Many people, as they get older, can't have bad backs, can't lift heavy objects. So they certainly when they're moving, they need a lot of help, but they need help when packages come in. And so the children that are around take more and more roles to help out, and especially if they help their parents downsize. And if you're an adult child, you probably find yourself taking over some roles that you never had before, such as planning a vacation for you and your parents, or hosting Christmas. Like in the old days, it's always the parents that were the hosts for Christmas dinner. But there comes a point where the kids take over and the parents become guests and the adult children are the hosts. Most people, by the time they're in their 80s, when they go to a doctor, they usually have somebody go with them, whether it's a child or somebody, a friend, but they usually have somebody with them, helping them. And as I said before, sometimes aging parents, as they get frailer towards their last stage of life, and maybe as they get to the late 80s and the 90s, they move back home to their child's home, or they move to their child's home. So this reversal is a slow process, and it can take, sometimes it can take years, sometimes it goes very fast. But I think what we're interested in is that sometimes it can be explosive, it can be bumpy. And when the minefields that I'm talking about, if you think about a minefield, there's hidden bombs that people can't see because it looks like an innocuous field maybe, but then somebody can walk in the wrong spot and it all blows up. Well, the parenting process can have that kind of drama. Suddenly something that looks like it's calm and like a green meadow, suddenly there's an explosion. Okay, next slide, Mina. I'm going to now tell you some stories that I wrote this book about, that came out about 2 years ago, well, a year ago and a half. And I did the research for it, and I found I was really interested in this relationship of parents and children. And so that way I asked a lot of questions in my research about what was going on and what were the events, what were the bumps, what were the things that were going smoothly. And so all of these stories that I'm going to tell you now, I'm going to tell you 5 stories. They're all real people. They are absolutely people. Some of them live right in close to you, within 5 miles, 10 miles of you. Some of them live all around the country, because I tried in my research to get people from every region of the country. And then I wanted to get people that were rich and poor, people that were of different ethnic groups, people that were Black and white and Hispanic. So it was not a perfect sample, but it was definitely not just all people that were upper middle class and highly educated. It had a lot of variation. But let me start by telling you about Millie. And she's the one who had many fender benders. When I interviewed Millie, she was 86. And she was a very chatty, friendly person who got on with everybody, liked to chat with her friends. And she lived in a retirement community, and she'd sort of go up and down the halls talking to people. And she was driving her car, and she had, over about a 6-month period, she had 4 fender benders, and her 3 children got very concerned about this. And they kept saying to Millie, no, you really shouldn't be driving, Mom. We're afraid something's going to happen. And she said, oh, no, just that's none of your business. No, I don't want to hear any more of that. And she would just be very abrupt and sharp with them every time they mentioned the idea of her not driving. So finally, one snowy wintry day, they got word that Millie had been out driving, and she had run into a school bus. Now, the good news is there were no children in the school bus. The bad news was her car was kind of, she ran in at enough speed that her car was pretty much totaled. So suddenly the children said, all right, no more car. And the police were saying the same things, that, she had just, that it wasn't a good, she was not to drive anymore. And so that ended Millie's fight to stay as a driver. And it was a sudden change. And it was the good news was nobody was hurt, because it could have been a really terrible catastrophe. And I think what we see in her case, that often we see with concerns from children, adult children, about their parents, that they, especially about driving, that they're concerned that they aren't safe drivers anymore. And so they think it's a disaster waiting to happen, and they do mention it, but they don't, many of them don't go beyond mentioning it and feeling worried. So I think here this story of Millie raises really questions about, what as a child, an adult child with a parent that maybe is doing dangerous things, what is your responsibility, not only to your parent, but to the people in the town? What is your civic responsibility to protect the people from a school bus from getting crashed into. What's your moral responsibility? And so I think that the lesson from Millie is that many of us, when it is a real question of danger, we see it, but we fail to act soon enough. And it's very hard to act because our parents are not going to be pleasant about giving up driving. Many of them, some do, some just say, okay, if that's what you think, and capitulate very easily. But many of you, if you tried to get your parent to stop, they won't do it. And so you're left with this real dilemma. But I would say that the lesson here is that you can wait too long and you shouldn't wait too long. And we can talk more about what you do to actually get Millie to stop driving if that's your mother or your father. Okay, my second story is about Barbara. Barbara was living in an adult community. Her mother, her daughter had helped her move, decided it was time for her to leave her house, and she helped her pack up and go to this retirement community. And I interviewed Barbara about after she'd been in this place about almost a year, 11 months, something like that. And she told me, she said, I hate this place, but I never have told my daughter because my daughter's done so much for me. I just can't bear to hurt her and to let her know that I don't like it. She said, I haven't made any friends. Now, Barbara looked to me when I met her, she looked very well groomed. She didn't look like she had any problems. I mean, sometimes I can tell when people have dementia if they look a little put lipstick smeared or things not quite right. But she was beautifully groomed and very sad and sort of teary as we spoke. And she said, I just couldn't tell my daughter, my daughter about that I was so unhappy. Well, I could see after I talked with Barbara a little bit more that she did have sort of moderate dementia. And that, of course, told me was why she wasn't making friends, because if you come to a place like that and you're already kind of compromised, it's hard to make friends. And she was really in the wrong place. And so it was not a correct place for her to live. And so ideally, it wouldn't have happened. But the lesson we get from Barbara is that sometimes the parents aren't going to speak up. And they're very prideful. They don't want people to know they have problems, and they're going to hide their unhappiness and their problems. Some parents have no idea. I mean, some adult children have no idea of the limitations that their parents have, that they don't know that they can't turn on their TVs, or they don't know that they're miserable. And so it wasn't long before the mother was clued in that by the place where she lived, that Barbara was not really an appropriate person for that place. And she was moved into a memory unit elsewhere and was happier when she was in a place that was more appropriate for her. But there's much to be learned from that story. And I think especially that the adult child, the daughter, never really asked her mother if she was happy, or didn't want to see that it was such a bad fit. Now we get to my third story is about Martin. Martin was one of three siblings. One of them lived in Europe, and the two that lived locally somewhere in New England. They had a father who was in a nursing home. He had gotten sick, and he was a very debonair, social person. And Martin, who was the son, the 55-year-old son, became upset, he told me in our interview, when he learned that his father had a new girlfriend that arrived on the scene at the nursing home. She had come she'd been working out of town and now was back in New England. And she sort of moved in on the father. She started coming 8 hours a day. She started ordering the nurses around about his care. And Martin and his sister got incensed. They kept describing her as brassy and not and very abrupt. And more important, they got very concerned that this new girlfriend was in it for their father's money. Their father had a house up in Maine, and he had, had been reasonably successful in his business life. So they started telling the nursing home, they said, this girlfriend can't come but an hour a day, and she can't be there 8 hours a day. Well, interestingly enough, the nursing home paid no attention to their directives. They were going to do what they were going to do. And so they let even though they didn't like the girlfriend much themselves, they let her come. But Martin and his sister continued to be terrified. They felt that they were going to lose all their money, that they were not going to get their inheritance. Both of them needed the money for their kids. They didn't for their tuitions. And so they lived in terror that the will had been changed. And when it turned out, when Martin's father died, they got a happy surprise that he had not left any money to the girlfriend and she had not been manipulating him. But I think the story of Martin alerts us to the fact that abuse, in fact, is a serious problem with the elderly, and you have to be careful and watching those people around your parents, and sometimes the abuse actually comes from the children who are not kind to their parents. But it is a real problem, and it usually often is a family member that is abusive, but it's also sometimes a caretaker, and sometimes people do wangle the money out of old people. Old people are very susceptible for scams. I can't tell you how many people here sign away like $4,000. They get one of these calls that saying, I'm in England and I don't have a wallet. Can you send me $4,000 because my passport and wallet was stolen? And they are nice people, so they just aren't. They're not savvy. They're not suspecting this, so they send off them. So you really realize that there are some threats for elderly aging parents, and they, especially when they get just a little bit of dementia, they are not swift enough to spot when there's a scam. Okay. So, and it's not that unusual that children get very interested in the money they're going to get and fight among each other, as well as worried that some girlfriend or whatever is going to get the money. Okay, the fourth story I'm going to tell you about is about another family there were 4 siblings in this family, 2 girls, 2 boys, who were all in their late 40s and 50s. And Francine was the mom, and she was, it was decided by the 4 children, they were talking one to another, that it was time for Francine to move because she wasn't that well, and it was time for her to move in with somewhere where she would have other people with her. So they decided they would have a phone call with all 4 of them to kind of decide where the mom should go. And they got on the phone, and it turned out to be like a major fight. One person thought, because she was one of the girls, thought she should be in charge because she had worked with health insurance, and she thought she should manage everything. The 2 boys didn't want to do much of anything, but they thought it should be decided right away. And the other daughter thought the mother should come to her, but the mother didn't want to come to her. And they left that phone call with nothing decided. And this situation of them fighting among itself went on for a couple of years. The mother finally moved in with her sister, but then one of the sons went to that house and thought there was mold that was dangerous and insisted the mother move, and the mother went to a retirement community, but she was didn't want to spend any money, so she went to the cheapest one in her state, and it was turned out to be uncomfortable, so she wanted to leave. Finally, she had just rented out her old house. So finally, when I left off in the story, she'd gone back to her original house and was living by herself. And the children had never made their peace. They continued to be fighting. So it was like a mess, and with no plan, no thought. And the mother kind of was a pawn. And the lessons we learned from Francine is that you have to have somebody in charge. You need a decision-making process. And you also need to bring the chief character into the story. Francine was left out of that phone call. Here were the children deciding for her where she should go. And they didn't think to bring her in and to ask her what she wanted to do. They just, in the beginning, just thought they took over and just sort of assumed they could make decisions for her. So that is really a red flag, and to remind everybody that should be these crises and situations should be as much as possible negotiated between and mutual, and listened to both sides listening to each other. And I always think of Francine and her 4 kids fighting like cats and dogs as an example of really how not to do these kinds of things. Now, my 5th story is, these are all, I've given you 4 negative stories, I am aware of that. And there were many stories of happy families and things working out well. So, but I wanted you to see some of the minefields that are there. And Nadia was one of 3 siblings, and they had a mother who they all were fond of, but none of them lived within 200 miles of where she lived. None of them were on site. So they had to do their parenting by telephone. But they figured it out and did a super job of handling their situation. They created a couple of good structures that worked for everybody. The first thing they had was a Thursday morning call, and that included Nadia, the 2 siblings, and the mother. And every week at 11 o'clock, I think it was, they would talk, not long, maybe 15, maybe 20 minutes, but it was a touch base. They could hear her voice. They could kind of assess how things were going, and kind of keep in touch. And she knew that would happen, and she looked forward to those calls, and it was part of her routine, and she felt she could count on her kids and they would all be there. Well, Nadia also would call her during the week more often. She'd call her 2 or 3 or 4 times other times, and she was the one that was given the role of just being the confidant of her mother. The other sister was the one that was managing the finance, the insurance, the medical bills. She was a hotshot on those kinds of things. And the son, when they really had to get the mother to go to the doctor, do something that she didn't want to do, the son was the one that could somehow persuade her. And so he was brought in for these crises because she would listen to him somehow. That's the one that he could speak with an authority that she respected. Now, they also had an early phone call on Thursday morning with just the kids, so they could be alerted if there was some issue that they wanted to settle. So they had this very routine way of doing things. It worked. Everyone was happy. The mother felt cared for. The kids felt secure that they were watching what was happening. And it shows that there are some real answers to these parenting crises, and they are that you do need some structures in place. You need people that manage either the whole relationship or parts of it, but you need people assigned jobs, and in their job, like the one that did the finances, was the authority, and so she didn't have to ask everybody every small detail. The other interesting thing you see with Nadia and her siblings, that our society still has some old-fashioned gender roles when it comes to taking care of aging parents. It's almost always the daughters who step up and take care of the mothers. And the mothers tend to live longer than the fathers, not always, but often. And often the boys, the adult children that are male, don't play such an active role. In Nadia's case, the son was there, but he had the smallest role. With Francine, those 4 children that fought like cats and dogs, the boys kept saying, well, would hang up, wouldn't listen, didn't want to be actively involved. And I think that's, so that is still an issue that the daughters usually step up. So that is the stories that alert you to some of the minefields that you need to be. I mean, one of my mantras for successful parenting, as this reverse parenting, the upside down parenting, is you need your eyes wide open. You need to be observant. So let's have the next slide past this one, Mina. So to just kind of to summarize again, I've said some of these things, but to put it all on one slide here, how to avoid minefields. You can't avoid them all, and you can't think that by all planning there will be no dangerous situations, no crises. They are bound to come, and the more planning that's done beforehand, the better it is. But so I would emphasize that dangerous situations, you have no choice. You do have to confront it. However, and if you that you've got to figure out a way that to get in there and make an intervention. And no matter how hard it is, you cannot let an aging parent, I mean, there's other kinds of things where you have to intervene. I've had people that, for instance, another person I interviewed had Parkinson's and insisted on using power tools, even though he had this incredible tremor. Now, that was another dangerous situation where the adult children needed to step up and intervene. So the next kind of guideline for avoiding minefields is this, what I was saying before, observing close up, and to realize that parents do get cagey. And I've been very surprised to learn how much they are able to hide from their children. They don't tell their children, for example, people that live in their own homes often don't tell their children that they've fallen, and they don't go to the emergency room. They just, and then, they don't do the right thing. So the people need to, when there are situations happening, need to be on the scene at some point to find out what's going on. I've always emphasized to my clients in my private practice, and in the writing when I give counsel, is the importance of asking the aging parents about their own feelings, as well as asking the adult children, the importance of everyone talking, but then listening to each other. Rather, people tend, it's like in Hamilton, remember when they tell Hamilton, talk less. I think most adult children, I would give the same counsel, talk less, listen more. Abuse is a real issue, don't be naive. And one of the real helps that most people don't understand, and sometimes it's so useful, is that you do need to clarify how you're going to make decisions. You can't vote, and sometimes takes forever to come to consensus if you have 4 siblings or 3 siblings or even 2. But so often it's good to let one person become the manager of the relationship and give them the responsibility. And then, and if you can agree on a manager, that works. But often they can't. And sometimes there's a situation where some people think that mom should move to a nursing home. Others think that no, she's all right, and there's no resolution. And in that case, I think it's always good to bring in an expert, a social worker, a counselor, and a family therapist, and they can help from they have a third party objectivity, and that's sometimes needed in a crisis. So I think learning to get help when it's needed is a good thing. Okay, so next slide, please. Well, and of course, we've all lived with COVID, and the whole issue of avoiding minefields and taking care of our aging parents, it's so much harder during this time of COVID and this time of waiting and the months rolling by. It's a time when the aging parents, most of them, some of them are living with their kids, but most of them are socially isolated, or they're in retirement homes, or where they can't be visited by the kids. So it means that everybody, you can't go and observe the way I was suggesting it before. You have to talk on the phone and get what you can do that way. And it's a time too that I've seen that adult children are panicky. They're very worried, very, very scared. And what I find is so interesting, I think that people my age, the 80s, are less panicky because we've lived through polio, we've lived through World War II, we've lived with parents who had grown up in depression, and we just don't expect everything to be hunky-dory. And we somehow are not. There are some of us that are very worried and some of us that are reckless. But I see in my talks and wanderings around and research, I see it turns out that adult children are apt to be more worried than their parents. And I think that could lead to problems with, because adult children, when they're more worried, tend to talk more and listen less and to make pronouncements. And you may all have known some families where the kids are very bossy and intrusive, and they tell the parents, no, you can't go anywhere, no grocery stores, you can't go, no, you can't go to CVS, no, you can't go see your friends. And sometimes the kids don't know how to push back. I think another thing in this time of COVID is that parents don't want to be a burden, so they don't complain. And they are social beings, but they don't ask for you to come over and visit them even when it's possible, because they know you're busy. And so that they just are stoical and are stiff upper lip, and maybe, and they really need to be helped. It's helpful if you can see they do need contact, and they do need social contact. It's not enough to be virus free. We need to, we're social animals. We need to connect with each other. And we're all learning, I'm sure you've learned some too, about the impact of loneliness on health and on our life. In England, you may know that they've thought that loneliness is such a major problem that they've appointed a minister of loneliness who's going to really help people deal with it and figure out how not to be lonely, because when people are lonely, they die sooner. They get, their immune system goes down. It's not good for their health at all. If you're lonely, it's like smoking 15 cigarettes a day, and it also is bad for your heart and everything else. So you need to be, as an adult child, assessing whether your parent is lonely, and if so, how they can, what they can do about it. And a couple of the things I found that you can do is help develop routines like Nadia and her family did. So you call every Thursday or every Monday, and also that maybe you visit every other week or whatever, depending where you live, or every day if you live down the street, whatever. And if I had to boil it down to the single most important word, I think, for happy relations between the generations, it's listening. And if you can listen and talk less and listen more, I think that will be good advice, and it will help your aging parents will feel heard when they can have your attention, and they feel like you understand what they're feeling, what they're thinking. That's a huge pleasure. Nobody wants to be sort of not known and invisible. So I'm going to stop there and take some questions, which I hope I'd like to hear questions. I'd like to hear concerns. I'd like to hear what's on your mind. So I hope some of you have I hope some of you can ask. Mina will read
Yes,
me the question.
we do have a question. I would like to hear about the most effective way to talk to aging parents around difficult subjects and vice versa. I'd also like to hear about the importance of setting boundaries for both parents and children in order to avoid developing resentment. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that the main thing is, I think that you have to have a conversation, so that the most important thing I think is to say you're concerned about the issue of your aging parent using the power tools, or whatever situation you have. You have to say, I'm concerned about X, Y, or Z. And then you say, I think we need to have a conversation, and we don't need to talk long, but let's talk tomorrow. I'll call you at 11 and let's have a short conversation about it. And then I think you don't start by saying, I'm concerned, please stop using the power tools, or you've got to stop driving. You don't start with the answer telling people. You start by saying, I've been thinking about the power tools. Dad, what would it be like for you to give up the power tools? What would it matter? What would be the upsides and the downsides? Do you have concerns yourself about your tremors, and are you afraid? And so you get their side of the story. And maybe you can't wrap it up, and you say, well, I think we've made a start. Let's talk again next week, or tomorrow. And then you might move into saying, well, I think we should, I think we should give it up. And if they say yes, sometimes they just say, you're right, if you say it firmly. But if they resist, then you may have to you have another meeting and bring somebody else in. But I think it's structuring the conversation is the way to start, because it's hard to get going. You don't know how to begin.
Right.
So read the question again, and let me see if I've answered it all.
Sure. What's the most effective way to talk to aging parents around difficult subjects and vice versa? And about the importance of setting boundaries for both parents and children in order to avoid developing resentment.
Well, I think, I think that children have to be encouraged to listen to the concerns of their parents. But I think, it's very hard for, I think, setting boundaries from the adult children to set a boundary for their parent is a very delicate matter. And as I said, I think you have to use danger and safety as a criteria. If it's just they're making a stupid decision, say they decide sometimes they decide they don't want to see their old friends. They say, I'm mad at Joe. Or so, they have the right to make a bad decision. And I think that's one of the hardest things for us as for us as adult children, to see parents making what seems such a silly way to go. But I think you have to realize, if it isn't safety or dangerous, then maybe they have the right to make a stupid decision.
This is a good question that comes up often, I think, in these kind of discussions is, how can you start conversations about financial issues without being seen as trying to get the parents' money and only being concerned about the money?
Right. I think that's very touchy, because sometimes they are concerned, as we've seen in my story of Martin. They really do want the money, but often they're worried that the parent. So I think, like anything else, I think it's very good. I know in my own family, when we got to be, in our, I would say, approaching our 70s, my husband and I had a meeting, and we said, we want you to see where we are, so that we were open about it, which I think is a good model. And we showed them, and so that they knew, and we weren't trying to keep it a secret. And that worked well for our family, so that everybody knew what the will said, and everybody knew what they would get, more or less, depending on what happened over the years. But I think you have to sense the willingness, and if the people, the aging parents, don't want to share, again, they have that right. So you have to kind of approach it in a way that say, well, I think there's so many, you may be concerned. I mean, that they aren't investing it wisely, or that they have got some person that you don't think knows anything advising them. So
Right.
it isn't an easy issue at all. And but I think that somehow staging a formal meeting sort of legitimizes it, saying, I think we should all share what we're, and sometimes around the holidays, it used to be a good time to do it when people were gathered, but now we're not gathering. So we'll have to wait for that.
It's true. So I'm curious about, to me, it seems like the top concern or a major concern for people as they age is the loss of autonomy. And so I'm wondering what would be your advice for us to talk to our aging parents respectfully about the things that they might not be able to do anymore. And I'll follow up with the second question after we mull on that.
I do think that, that's a really good question there, because I think one of the ways of looking at aging is that you do lose things. I mean, if you get to be 80, for example, about half the people in your age group have died, so that you've lost a lot of your friends, and you do start to lose parts of your body don't work quite so well. I mean, a lot of people are on walkers, or they have arthritis in their hands, or they have that. Almost everybody has some kind of losses. And one of the things we don't do very well in this society is to grieve, and I think before you can move on, and there is a lot of happiness. I mean, one of my great findings in the research was that people in their 80s are happier than the people in the 70s and the people in the 60s and the people in the 90s. The people in their 80s are unexpectedly happy, and they are survivors. And I think they realize that even if they have had these losses, they do have the gift of life, and they are able to enjoy it. We've all heard youth is wasted on the young, and but old age is not wasted on the old, because we value it, and so that we're not nearly as unhappy as I think the adult children think we are. So that the adult children, our 50-year-old kids, think, well, if I couldn't hear, and if I had to use a walker, and I had skin cancers all the time, and I had to go to get those dealt with, and I would be so miserable, that they sort of assume that we're miserable. And the fact is, people survive, and they accommodate, and they get used to their situation. And what the research shows is they don't say, oh, I feel unhappy because I'm on a walker. They feel I'm good because I no longer have that runny nose I had last week, or my sore thumb, it feels better. So it's the little ups and downs. I mean, maybe about the research was between who's happier. Somebody in the happiness studies looked at who's happier, paraplegics or people that win the lottery in their state, win over $1 million. Well, the research showed, just because of course it's what you don't expect, is that the paraplegics are happier. And it's because people that win the lottery, it's kind of a hard road. They don't know how to handle the money. People are after them, and the high, the rush that you from winning goes away in about a week, and people are often miserable. One of my people in my sample had won the Illinois state lottery, but then he said he mentioned it at church, and so he felt he had to give half the money to the bishop and so on. It was like. So, but paraplegics are like us older people. They realize they're lucky to be alive. They probably missed, most of them have been in an accident of some kind. And that they treasure what they do have. So you have to look a little, I think people have to grieve, and you can't tell somebody else really to grieve, but that is the skill that makes a difference. If you know how to grieve, that makes being old all that much. So for yourselves, if you can remember that, and that the losses do have to be grieved, but it's kind of hard to tell your parents that.
Yeah, well, I'm sure they learned it as they go. So the second part of that question was, when do this is different for every person, but when would you suggest that these conversations start happening?
Oh, I think right away. I mean, I think when, you start having them, and in my book, I have conversation starters. Every chapter has a list of conversation starters, because I think it is easier to find something that is right there that gives you sort of opening gambit lines. So I think even, when your parents get to be 70, you want to find out what kind of plans have they done? What is it? What are their thoughts 5 years, 10 years out? What are they planning? And the first thing you need to find out is, have they done a will? Do they have their health proxies? Because that like 3/4 of the people don't have wills. It's ridiculous. So that you can start, when your parents hit 70, having a meeting, and then you can get wills yourselves, because everybody should have their will done. And then it gets to be known that you'll have a meeting maybe every year, maybe every now and then, and it isn't seen like this is such a big deal. But I think we all tend to avoid the serious conversations in our family that we absolutely should have. So that this should be an extremely high priority.
Right. I agree. Can you talk a little bit before we end about your book, 80 somethings?
Yes, I'd love to. This is my book was came out of when I was turned 80. I had a few months when I was in a funk. My husband was on dialysis and not doing well, and I had some bladder issues and so on. So I decided, I was feeling pretty lousy. And then one day I woke up and thought, well, somebody must have some answers. And I want to find out what it is really like to be in your 80s, and who's got some suggestions on how to make it really good. And so I decided to write the book, and I interviewed all these people, and I learned a lot of good news, partly from these people were doing amazing things. I thought I was kind of still active. I still was working, but I found people that were doing things I could have never imagined, and thinking thoughts. And it was just a delightful and wonderful experience for me. The more I did interviews, the less depressed I was, and the better my funk disappeared. And then I got really excited about the potential that, aging today is not anything like what it was for our grandparents just 50 years ago. There is so much good news about aging, and I'll just give you the highlights. One is, of course, modern medicine. Most people in their 80s are not in pain, and so much can get fixed. We have, knees and shoulders and hips and cataracts and hearts they're fixed now. And it's just that, life goes on in a way. We have an extra 40 years compared to just 60 or 70 years ago. So that's all good news. And we have, and so you need to be aware that there's much to look forward to. And I think that's what I'm sort of now on a mission myself, to just get the word out about. People don't know that. And there's some research about the aging brain too. I grew up, and maybe you did, hearing that we lose a few brain cells every day, especially if we have a glass of wine or something. And so I got thinking, well, I have a glass of wine, probably my brain by the time I'm 80 will be completely empty. But now we learn that no, the aging brain, we can keep learning up till the time we are 105. And that we can learn, we can develop, and that we can do things that heal our brain if we are getting depressed, like I was for those couple of months. There's things that change that can heal the brain, like meditation and yoga. And so that we're learning that the brain isn't just a declining thing, and once you turn 65, it's downhill. That's absolutely not true. And that people need to be up, catch up about what's happened and what we know, what the scientific world, what the facts are about aging, and that we've mostly got bad stories, the stereotypes still in our head. Anyhow, the book tells all about this. It's an easy read. I suggest all of you give it. People here at my place, like one person gave 11 copies for her Christmas present. It's not expensive. People love the book. A lot of people say it changed their lives. Some people, adult children, said, that they were having found they were impatient with their parents. They were either, the parents were slow, or they had dementia, or it is difficult. There's no question about it. Those kinds of parents are difficult, but they got a new perspective from the book that gave them, one person said, I used to be so impatient with my mother, but after reading the book, I had a whole new attitude. I could see the beauty of the person inside. And I think I'll end with that. I have one more thing I want to say about the beauty inside, which is, you may have heard of the Japanese art, an art called kintsugi, which is the art of putting together broken pottery with a golden lacquer. And here's a piece of kintsugi. You can probably see that. It's got some gold in there. And what the theory here is that you take these broken pieces and you put them together with the golden lacquer, and this bowl, the new bowl, is more beautiful than the original bowl. And it's that the brokenness has been put together with the gold. And I see that as a metaphor for old age, that all of us have had losses and been, we're like the broken pottery in the sense that our bodies work differently, and we've been patched up, patch, but that you can think of it as a sort of golden lacquer, that this new creation of the people, those of us that survive into our 70s, 80s, 90s, there is such a beauty in old age, the people that have survived all these crises and losses and keep on having this unexpected happiness and joy, and have the ability to learn and to love right to the very last days of their life. And so that's what I'd like to leave you with, is in just this picture of the old age as a kind of a new kind of beauty, that it's an acquired taste maybe, but there is, I think, so much that everyone needs to learn, and that we, so that we get new stories in our brains about what old age is and what it's not. So thank you so much. I've enjoyed talking with you, and hope you all fare well with your through and escape the minefields, and have great relationships with your aging parents. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Katharine. Teresa says in the chat that you are a great inspiration.
Thank you.
So I'm going to just share my screen really quick, because you had some last couple
of last two. Yes, I wanted to, if you want to stay in touch, you can, I have a website, and I write blogs. I write the blogs about one a month. And so, and then those of you that want to do Facebook and me, I write some essays on Medium. I'd love to stay in touch with you. And you can, it's all about aging well and what you can look forward to as you age yourself. Yeah.
Katharine, I'll put these links in the my recap that I send out to everybody as well.
That's good. And put the last one about the book again, is you can get it at Amazon. It comes overnight, and or at your local bookstore. And it is it is very practical, in the sense, not about what nursing home to go to, but practical. And it looks at the psychological worlds of older people. That is what bewilders people, adults, people in their 50s and 60s. And it is like opening a window into understanding what it feels like to be older. And I think it'll help you to understand your aging parents a lot better. So thanks. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Katharine. This has been really wonderful. I hope everybody got lots out of it. I certainly did. So thank you.
Okay, well, you're welcome. I enjoyed it too, and I liked the questions. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Goodbye, everybody. Have a great day.
Bye.